whenever you get a case, it's like putting a puzzle together. You've got to put this, the pieces of the puzzle together. Ultimately, you're going to have a finished picture that you're able to show the jury.
This is the Trials Podcast, where we focus on the challenges the injured face and how we meet and deal with those challenges, especially in litigating catastrophic injuries. I'm here today with trial lawyer Forrest Taylor, and we're going to be going forward into an interview with Bill Brose regarding the social media and video game litigation cases. Before we do that, Forrest, would you give us an update, talk with us about what you've been working on this week and this past month or so?
Well, as typical, the big thing for us, we deal with a lot of personal injury. And in that, we depose a lot of doctors who have treated our clients who, either been involved in a car wreck or hurt by a defective product. And so we're always, it seems like every week we're taking a doctor's deposition. And I think one thing that's important is being able to communicate your client's injuries to a jury. And it's gotten, and we're talking about social media and video games, which ties into depositions and trial testimony now, because the way that people are used to are being fed information now is much different than it used to be. And I think we have to take that into consideration as trial attorneys, is how do we present this evidence to a jury? And that's one of the things that we've been working on is updating the way that we take depositions, the way that we present evidence at trial. So, but it sort of ties into, again, the way that people get information now. So, so that's been the big thing, in the last few weeks.
Well, Forrest, just to go in a little deeper on that, first of all, let's kind of start with the basics. In Alabama, in order to prove injuries, we typically are going to rely on medical testimony.
Correct, right.
And but you also talked about how people are receiving information now. So just a couple of things with that. An example of this, I know you recently wrapped up a mediation, and one of the issues in that case was a very unique jaw injury that involved a dental implant.
Right.
And initially, the insurance company attorney was not willing to attribute that injury.
Right.
The subsequent dental work that was required to that wreck. So, and then, so you were called on to take the doctor's deposition to tie all that up. I know this is long-winded here, but there's definitely a question here. So when you talk about how people receive information, I'm assuming you're talking about the advancements in technology,
right,
some of the things that you're using. So not only do you have the doctor's testimony to present at trial, you've got technology, illustrations. So talk with us about the deposition.
Well, I think a couple of things. When I first started practicing, we would actually read depositions at trial. And, now you would never get away with doing that. Just the visual nature of the way that people receive communication now. So the other thing I think that's really important is to have illustrations, MRIs, X-rays that you can use in these depositions to help convey the message. And that's changed a lot since I've been practicing. Again, just the reliance on technology when you're taking a deposition. It's just, there's a lot more expectations, I think, from jurors now because of the social media and things like that, that to keep a juror's attention, I think, is much harder than it used to be. So we've had to adapt to the times to up our game, so to speak, in presenting evidence to jurors.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, yes, I can definitely say that I've been on the witness stand to just read a medical transcript, and so you compare that to the way it was done so often in the past. Now let's look at what you recently did to prove the jaw injury, the dental work. You had a videographer as well as the imaging, the imaging that would clearly demonstrate the injury, as well as the work that was done, and again, kind of the permanent nature of that.
Right, and I think it's so important, like with the dental injury that you were talking about, getting the diagnostic studies, where it be X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. They're so important now, and I think also it can help us prove causation. For example, like with a spinal injury, a lot of times people are walking around with arthritis in their spine. How can you tell the difference between what was pre-existing, say from a car wreck, versus what was caused by a car wreck? And fortunately, a lot of times MRIs and CT scans will pick up, say, edema, which is bleeding around the spine. Say you've had a spinal injury. And what that tells us, and what it tells a doctor, is that is a recent injury. It's not a pre-existing injury. So things that we can rely upon, are like the diagnostic studies. And the other thing, when you're able to see, a fractured bone, a fractured jawbone, and you're able to see that in an X-ray, it really speaks volumes. They always say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, that's true a lot of times. And a jury can really see and visualize, the injury. So those are some of the things that, again, that's changed, over the course of the time that I've been practicing law.
Well, and to me, as you talk through this, it's really exciting to think back on the way things were, again, where we're essentially somebody sitting on the witness stand reading testimony from a transcript.
Right.
And yes, there's pictures and illustrations oftentimes to go to that would accompany that, along with medical records and billing. But now, everything's up on the big screen, and the doctor's testimony and illustrations, records, it becomes closer to watching an episode of a television show, or some type of documentary about our client and the injury they sustained.
Right. That's true. It is. And, one thing that hasn't changed is, whenever you get a case, it's like putting a puzzle together. You've got to put this, the pieces of the puzzle together. Ultimately, you're going to have a finished picture that you're able to show the jury. But that's, behind the scenes, that's what you're doing. Like you talked about, collecting the medical records, evidence, and things like that. And I know with our guest coming up, Bill Brost, who is involved in the social media video gaming litigation, that is an especially daunting task, because there's just so many records, so much documentation, and then the science behind it. So and that all goes into building your case and then being able to effectively present that to a jury.
Well, and Forrest, I believe, you know, back to the medical depositions, I believe you've easily been involved in thousands
Right.
of depositions, and specifically medical and doctor depositions,
Right.
and it's been my observation and my experience. I believe that they often appreciate your ability to go through the records, focus on the injury, the questions at hand for the case, along with the understanding of the illustrations and the exhibits that would go along with that. And it seems like when you're, with that approach and with you being prepared that way, the depositions seem to go a lot better.
Right. Right. And I think that's, I think the trick to being a good trial attorney, or one secret, it's not really a secret, but just preparation. You've got to understand, the mechanism of injury. You've got to understand the medicine, and then you've got to be able to effectively use technology to bring that story to the jury.
And Forrest, I think it would be a great place to transition over to our interview with Bill regarding the video game
Right.
and social media cases. But I will say this, and I know, we both had the opportunity to work with and work around trial lawyer Randy Smith. And Randy often said, we don't win our case at trial, we win our case during trial
Right.
preparation.
So true. Right. So true. Yeah, we're excited to have Bill Brose here and talk about the social media and video gaming.
Absolutely. Good morning, Bill. I want to welcome you back to the Trials Podcast as our first. We're happy and glad, really excited about this interview today, and to have you back as a two-time now guest on the Trials Podcast. And if you would, Bill, for those that maybe didn't listen to the prior episode that you were on, would you give us an introduction and also tell us what you've been working on since we last talked to you?
Yeah, hey, and thanks for having me again. I'm Bill Brose. I'm an attorney up in Birmingham. I work with the firm Henniger, Garrison, Davis. I work primarily in the area of mass tort litigation. What does that mean? I do a lot of cases specifically with pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and we're going to talk in a minute about social media cases where there are a lot of individuals that have similar but not the same types of injuries, but are impacted by some device or some situation that covers a whole lot of individuals, if you will. So it's a little different sort of world than doing your what I call single event or regular plaintiffs types of cases. We've been working on a whole bunch of things. I don't know how much detail you want me to go in. I know we're going to focus on social media. And do you want me to start there or?
Well, Bill, yeah, I believe since that's the focus here today, I believe that would be a great place to start. And, we certainly appreciate you and the work that you do with us and our clients. And and I think just a good place to start would be an overview. Again, I know you explained it in the past, but would you give us an overview of the social media and video game addiction cases?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. So, we're looking at social media cases, and basically, there's a number of companies that have developed platforms, I guess is the best word, and Meta is a big one. They have Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. You also have Snapchat, uh, a whole variety of platforms. And what they've done, and what we've discovered, and when I say we, I mean our firm and many, many other firms collectively across the country have discovered that these companies intentionally developed strategies within and algorithms within their platforms to entice and hook our children. And I say children because the brain of a child, somebody below the age of 18, is not fully developed or wired, if you will, and so it can be more easily enticed and altered. And what we've seen, and research bears it out, is a host of psychological and mental conditions that are associated with exposure to these platforms and addiction to these platforms. I'll talk about that more in depth in a minute, and also physical issues. We have a wide range of injuries. A lot of children that um, we're seeing a huge increase in children with, say, for example, anxiety and depression, and treatment for those conditions. Uh, Kids who are engaging in self-harm type activities, cutting, hitting, things like that to themselves, and also kids who are attempting suicide. It's an unprecedented increase in these types of behaviors. I don't want to call it an epidemic, but we've seen a huge rise in these things, and it's a lot of it is because of the development of these platforms and the way they're hooking our children into spending time on these. I've talked with a lady this week whose son was a very active, and he was a 10-year-old, a very active little athlete, at school and in clubs and playing basketball, and started watching Facebook and other platforms, and now she can't get him away. Get him away from his phone or from his iPad or laptop device, and you know his social being has completely changed because of that. So that's just one example. We have countless numbers of those stories out there.
Well, and Bill, I know something else that you've seen, because this is something that we've discussed. What are some of the vulnerabilities or the things that children are susceptible to on these platforms? What are there similarities in cases that you're seeing where our children are being exposed to things that really shouldn't be happening, or shouldn't have that kind of exposure to?
Yeah, it's a host of things. What we're seeing is the way, and the research again bears it out, that these companies have neurophysiologists, neuropsychologists that they use to develop algorithms. You know, and heck, I think we're all sort of guilty of looking at things. For example, the perpetual or infinite scrolling. Kids instead of spending a few minutes on something will spend hours and
Right.
hours on things. Um, and how do you then get them away from that? I've had again parents ask us, what can I do? And it's not the parents' fault. The parents haven't come up with these algorithms that hook our children, and it's a very 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 tough situation. There's a lot of interaction then on some of these platforms with other individuals. There's sort of a new line of litigation where things are going more into video gaming, which is sort of another separate thing, but it goes sort of hand in hand with what we're seeing in the social media. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, but
Well, one thing that I was thinking about is we're seeing our children contacted by people on these platforms that may not have their best interest at heart. So it's exposing them not only to the addictive nature of the platform, which um, it sounds like you're seeing financial, medical, and psychological issues arising from that, but then they're also being contacted on these platforms by people that may not have or don't have their best interest at heart.
you're exactly right. And we've seen that we've seen a great rise in that through the platform, through a gaming platform in the game Roblox. Um, very, very popular, probably one of the top 3 or 4 gaming platforms in the world. Billions of individuals play that. And you're right. There are platforms, they don't do any type of substantial check as to the ages and the identities of the individuals that are coming onto some of these platforms. And I'll give you an example and I mentioned Roblox. They have really no clear mechanism to address the age and identity of the people that come on there. And what we've seen is a huge increase of individuals who are posing as minors or children and coming into these chat areas or gaming areas and you know forming a relationship with a minor and then taking that to another platform in a different level, chatting, and unfortunately sometimes exchanging sexual materials with those minors, and in the extreme cases, meeting them somewhere. This is something that we never even thought of just a couple of years ago, even. So it's very, very scary. As a parent myself, we have to keep these things in the back of our mind. When our kids are getting onto these platforms.
Well, Bill, a couple things you've touched on, I'd like to follow up with you. One, the social media platforms and those cases, and then you mentioned roadblock and video game cases. I know there's some similarities and there's some differences in that litigation. Could you explain that to us, the similarities and differences in the social media versus the video game cases?
Yes, for sure. The social media, the platforms usually are, easily accessible. They are, there's no cost to join them. They are infinite as far as, the time that children can spend on them. I will say among the cases, the injuries are very, very similar as far as the psychological and mental conditions that kids are experiencing. We have seen a lot of, with social media, some physical conditions associated with eating disorders, maybe a result of activities they've watched or the chats they've seen within these platforms. Either they need to lose weight or gain weight or, things like that. We see in video gaming, very, very similar. You have a lot of platforms. There's a lot of costs sometimes associated with these platforms. And, unfortunately, something you have to consider and monitor with your children is, it's one thing getting in these games, that they set it up so that, kids coming into these games, or adults for that matter, do well to start with. They win games, they move along, but then, they need to, if they want to progress, they've got to purchase some things, some tokens or things that help them in that particular game. And all games are different. The 3 big video games that our firm and most firms are focusing on, I mentioned Roblox, and then there's Minecraft and Fortnite. Those are the 3, I guess, biggest games globally, and the companies have very, very, very deep pockets, if you will. But also in the video gaming, and in addition to mental conditions, you'll see there's a lot of repetitive movements in what they're doing, and so you see a lot of injuries with their hands and carpal tunnel, elbow, sort of injuries like that. Of note is that the Psychological Association has identified Internet Gaming Disorder (IGD) as a recognized condition now, and there's a checklist, and we've had our clients look at the checklist, and it's amazing. There's about 7 or 8 things that you check off, and it sort of reaches the definition of that type of a diagnosis, and they're really, really common in all these kids that we see playing the games. So very, very similar, I guess, if you will, but there are some subtle differences, in the two.
Well, Bill, when you talk about these issues, what kind of time are we talking about? As far as, children on the platforms and on the games, are we talking an hour a day, or what is it that you're seeing when these addictions set in?
I'm sorry, that's a good question. Some of our children may just be on the platforms, and I think it's hard to say if you're on it X number of hours a day or X number of days a week, then you may have an issue. I can't. When we've talked with uh, psychiatrists and psychologists, there's each child is different. Their developmental stage is a little different. But yeah, what we usually see though is several hours a day, and talking with many parents, they thought that their child had gone to bed at 9 o'clock, and find out they were up till 3 or 4 in the morning playing these games. Was not able to attend school the next day. So there's no way to put a sort of set limit on that. As parents, we just need to be mindful of these things, and check in and see what our kids might be doing. There's several hours a day, though, each day of the week is probably unhealthy behavior in most children. You know, you see a lot of changes. I mentioned, socially. I mentioned the child who didn't play sports anymore. Kids become withdrawn. With the gaming, you see a lot of gamers rage, another diagnosis. You see a lot of defiant episodes and defiant syndrome. So there's a whole host of things that can come of that.
Well, Bill, I think there was a recent verdict last week in a social media case. Is that correct? Out in New Mexico?
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up. Let me do a little back step for just a second. In cases like this, we mentioned mass torts. A lot
Right.
of times they're consolidated before one federal judge, and the cases in this litigation are consolidated before a federal judge out in California. There's also a uh, simultaneous arm of litigation going on out in California in a state court, in a consolidated state court action. And you mentioned the New Mexico trial. You're
Right.
right. Um, it just ended in a verdict out there, $375 million this week. Actually,
And
that
that,
case is a little different.
right.
That case
Go ahead. I'm
was
sorry.
brought. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was an attorney general action. It was
Right.
brought by the attorney general of New Mexico, and there's a number of those cases out there. There's also a number of cases with litigation by school systems, because
Hmm.
of the extra time and energy they have to devote to the children. But sorry, but the New Mexico case was an attorney general action. They were seeking damages on behalf of the state for certain services provided, and also for families and individuals that may have been harmed. Um, if it's okay, I'll touch on what I call the personal injury
Right.
litigation. There is a trial that has just ended out in California in the state court consolidation. The jury has had it now for this will be our 10th day. So the trial went on for weeks and weeks. Okay, a very large trial against Meta,
So the jury's been out for
Facebook.
10 days?
Yeah, the jury has been deliberating. This is the 10th. This will be the 10th
I
day.
would think the attorneys have to be on pins and needles right now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We don't know what's going to happen. We think this works in our favor. We think they're really digging at the types of
Right.
damages and things
Right.
like that. So, but yeah, so that is exciting news for us. That was a case, a young child again, and it wasn't some extreme case. It was a child with a host of psychological injuries, if you will, that sort of fits the pattern of a lot of kids we see that they just their whole attitude and outlook and uh, their hygiene, the whole host of things just changes as they become absorbed with these platforms. So we're anxious to see how that one ends. Over the summer, there'll be another trial up in the federal court. So
Hmm.
we'll see how this all shakes out.
Do you know about how many cases? You mentioned the MDL. Do you know how many cases are in the MDL right now?
Yeah, I believe there's a few thousand.
Okay.
It's just really the tip of the iceberg. Our firm has a number of cases there, as do many firms across the country.
Right.
We continue to take new cases and work up. work up new cases. And what does that mean? We have conversations usually with the parents or grandparents or guardians of the children. Sometimes we'll actually talk with the children as well with the parents. We have to obtain medical records, which are all
Hmm.
held in confidence, of course, of the treatment that those children have had.
And do you see, one thing I was thinking about, are they blaming the parents in a lot of these cases? Lack of supervision and things like that?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, the defendants, of course, have their tactics, and they do. They we had a client here in the Montgomery area of Alabama who was picked earlier as an initial sort of trial pick, if you will, uh, and was sat through depositions and all. And the parents and significant others, you can imagine they deposed a whole lot. But yes, they try to pin it on the parents a lot.
Right.
Why aren't you watching your child? Why don't you take their devices away? Um, you know, it-
But,
just a host of things like that, as you can
Hmm.
imagine.
Bill,
And again, I try to tell parents there's only so much you can do.
Right.
It's not the parents'
And
fault at
it's
all.
almost like the parents are trying to stop this tidal wave. It's just impossible for one parent to do that. And because these kids are bombarded constantly with this, with this enticing to do the video games or social media. And I feel sorry for parents, that have young kids coming up that have to face this. So very difficult situation for them.
yeah, and Forrest, I appreciate you bringing that question up because that is kind of a theme, and we know that's a common question, whether somebody's involved in the cases or not. Is it's just easy to easy to blame the parents. But Bill, wouldn't you say, based on the research, the discovery that's being done, the development of the cases, that that's a very surface level question? I mean, yes, we realize it's an issue, but isn't that really the wrong question to be asking in these cases with, again, some of the extremes that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's not the fault of the parents. It's not the fault of the guardians of the kids. Um, what we need to be looking at, and what we hope this litigation will bring about, is some change to the creation and the
Hmm.
ways they build these platforms, and maybe built-in timers, built-in things that can, ultimately reduce the social media exposure our kids are being.
But
You know,
and and Bill, you talk about timers. What about some of the financial cost? Isn't that another trend that you're seeing, in particular on the video game platforms? The amount of money that children are allowed to spend on these platforms, isn't that an issue?
Oh, it surely is. I know, Aaron, you and I talked with a potential client who had a child who had spent thousands of dollars.
Hmm.
There's no check in place on these things. And think about it. A child who's been playing a game and wants to continue playing the game but needs some money may indeed, unfortunately, find ways to get a parent's credit card or bank statement or something and enter that data. Our children are very, very, smart when it comes to that. And there's not a limit that we know of. You can spend X number of dollars today, and keep on spending. And there's no way to. It'd be one thing if they had some mechanism to see how much money had been spent in games, and I don't know though how they would want. What's an effective way to warn somebody? Um, these are kids. They're not meant to be kids to begin with. There's not a good check on a lot of these things to see how old these kids are that are spending this money. But yeah, it is a growing body of litigation for sure related to the video gaming.
Well, and Bill Forrest, I'm glad he brought up the litigation and the ongoing cases And as you've pointed out, the jury is still out on one of those cases. But since we last talked to you about this, have there been any other notable developments with the research, the discovery, the litigation that's ongoing? Are there any other developments and updates you'd like to talk with us about?
Yeah, well, yes. There's been a whole lot of more discovery. There's been a whole number of other first round cases, if you will, that are being worked up for litigation. Experts, as you know, you have to have
Right.
experts in these cases, and they continue to be developed. Uh, Research, that there's going to be a push for more research into this. There have been other studies that have come forward from other countries as well. Noting the incidence of injuries, psychological and physical, related to exposure to these platforms. So I think it's not something just we're focused on here in the United States. It's definitely a global epidemic, if you will. And yes, and since we last talked, of course, we've had the trials. We've had the first sort of wave of trials, and now we're anxious to see how the federal trial goes. In these mass tort cases, a lot of times there may be a handful of trials, and then the defendants won't, and the judge's job is to try to help all the parties come together and see if there's a way to resolve this. That's equitable, for everybody. So, it's exciting. It's an exciting time in this area of litigation.
Yeah, Bill, I agree. And with regard to trials, when a family contacts us with these issues, should they expect to go to trial? Should they expect their case to be a case that's going to wind up in a jury trial?
And that's a good question too, and we get that a lot. No, it would be rare that your case would have to go to trial. Right now I mentioned there's a large number of cases, already filed that are in discovery and workup to trial. Uh, there's no way they can try all the cases, for sure not in the MDL where they're centralized. If something were to happen at some point in the MDL, the judge there dissolves or disbands the MDL, then the cases that are filed there, and it sounds weird, they're all sort of in California, but I live in
Right.
Alabama. That's common in this, but if at some point that would happen, then all the cases would be sort of sent back to the venues or locations they came from. And that again would open the floodgates on what the defendants have to expend to defend all those cases. And I'm sorry, that was a long way to answer that. But no, I tell our clients it's very, very rare. The chance that your case would have to actually go to trial would be rare. And if it were to be selected, that's a bridge we could cross, later on.
And Bill, so what can a family, a parent, a grandparent expect when they contact us and regarding the video game and social media addiction cases? I know you mentioned getting records together, preserving, how is their claim or their case preserved?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, and again, we're still looking at these cases. Feel free to reach out to any of us about this. But yeah, we have an initial sort of intake, if you will. There's some general questions that we ask all of our clients concerning when the exposure might have started. Things like we discussed, how long, what are the behavioral changes you've noticed, what type of treatments have they had to have, and we mentioned the physical conditions. A lot of these kids, they were straight A students, and not anymore. They're on the education plans. A number of our kids have dropped out of school or been reassigned to different schools. So, we try to go over all that. How has your child been impacted by this? Then we do work up and get records. We try to stay in contact with all of our clients. We have periodic town halls by Zoom to update you. We also have a client portal, very, very similar to your patient portals when you
Right.
go to the doctor. So you can sort of follow the phases the case goes through and, get some clarity there. And of course, we're always there, just like y'all, to talk on the phone, email if we need to. Um, we do tell our clients this is a very long process. Okay. Litigation like this can unfortunately take a number of years. And I'm trying to think back. It's been going on for a little while now, but we're to the trial phase, and that takes a while usually to get there. This case has actually moved quicker than other mass tort cases that we've been involved in.
And Bill, I know you've already touched on this, but a way to distill it down, to drill it down, I know you've touched on financial anxiety, depression on kind of one end, and then the more extreme hospitalizations. What are warning signs that parents should be aware of? Again, based on what you're seeing in these cases.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough question. Each child is different, but just be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for behavioral changes, social changes, spending. Why do they want more money? They're not going anywhere. Uh, Isolation.
Right.
They're in the room all the time. Anything out of the ordinary. We have unfortunately a number of children that have attempted suicide, and unfortunately some have completed suicide. And of course we've got to be aware also that there are many other factors out there in our world and our environment, of course, that influence us and our children. So we can't, of course, say everything is caused by social media, but we need to be on alert. We need to be on alert to look for these things and as concerned parents. We talk to many parents, and we talked to some parents that didn't know they could actually put settings. They could adjust their kids' devices so that they can't spend so much time. Simple things like that. And we're not trying to remove social media. There are a lot of there are a lot of benefits from social media too, and a lot of educational activities take place there. Being able to communicate with people you wouldn't be able to communicate with frequently. So you have to strike a balance, I guess, but you do have to, keep your antennas on high alert for
Right.
things that change rapidly or more quickly than you think they should.
Well, Forrest, Bill, I'm really enjoying this conversation. And if you all would do it, I would be here all day talking with you about it. Forrest, as we go through this, is there anything else that you can think of, or anything that comes to mind that you'd like to
No,
ask Bill or talk
I think
with him?
Bill's covered it really well, and we certainly appreciate the work that your firm and other firms are doing to advance this litigation. It reminds me a lot of the tobacco litigation, and that was a very long, long call. But I think it's the work of plaintiffs' attorneys like yourself that really address these social problems or social evils that we're facing. And if it wasn't for trial attorneys, a lot of times government agencies just they're captured by the industry. So I really appreciate your work and the work the other firms are doing on this. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, Forrest, I'm glad you said that, because I know as trial lawyers, as lawyers, we're the butt of a lot of jokes. And so often we definitely deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
But I really believe these are cases that we're on the right side of the facts and the law. And with that, Bill, is there anything else you'd like to say as we get to the end, or anything else that we need to touch on?
No, I think, again, thank you for having me here. We believe this is a very important case.
Right.
And you're right. It's taken a lot of law firms. We're just one law firm out of many, many, many firms, that have been working on this litigation for some time. And we're going up against, powerful
Right.
defendants with powerful defense firms. And, we're hoping that we can have a good result and change the way that social media and video gaming are handled. You mentioned the tobacco industry, and you're right. We had another case we did a few years back, and it concerned vaping. The rise of vape,
Right.
and a certain company that was really marketing towards kids.
Right.
And that industry we were able to change some. And when I say we, collectively, many firms again
Right.
across the country. So you're right, and we are the brunt of a lot of jokes. We know that, but we are working hard, and hopefully we'll affect change that's important for us and our kids.
Well, Bill, we definitely appreciate your friendship, the work that you and your firm does with us and our clients. And again, we really appreciate you being back with us on the Trials podcast. We're excited to continue to work these cases with you and your firm, and to have you back soon for another update.
Sure. Thanks again, y'all. And again, we're still looking at these cases. Feel free to reach out to Forrest and Aaron, and we're happy to chat with you about it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
If your child is having issues with video games, social media, that is more than just spending hours in front of the phone, or the device, if it's affected your child's schoolwork, his or her ability to socialize, please give us a call. We'll evaluate your case. There's no charge for our initial consultation, and we would be glad to talk with you. Thank you.
We appreciate you tuning in, watching, listening, and we would invite you to subscribe to the Trials podcast.